Robert Keller emptied the leather pouch, a few copper coins. The firewood pile was almost gone.
We can't afford more wood. The house will freeze, but the animals, they throw off heat. We'll sleep above them.
But Pa, the whole town will call us barn animals. I'll never hear the end of it.
That night, they hauled their bedding through the cold. There was no other way. Inside, cattle breath steamed in the lantern light. The air was heavy, alive with warmth. Anna climbed into the loft and pressed her sleeve to her nose. But the floor was warm.
You'll get used to the smell. A warm pig beats a frozen nobleman any winter night.
Through the open hatch, the body heat of the cattle rose steadily, wrapping the small chamber. By sunrise, the neighbors had noticed. The Keller family was bedding down with their cows. The frost deepened overnight. But under the barn roof, the cold had not reached them yet.
I can taste the manure in the bread, Pa. It's all I smell anymore.
The smell means warmth, and warmth is life. That's all that matters right now.
Each day, Robert packed mud and straw into the barn's seams. Still air, he had learned from an old freighter, was the only real shelter against the cold.
Wind steals heat faster than a thief. Stop the draft, and the animal's breath does the rest.
Outside, the gossip thickened. Someone said the Kellers were living like animals. Then David Wheeler came up the lane, his face hard with purpose.
I saw your beds above the stalls, Keller. This is indecent. You'll make the whole valley a slum.
My daughter won't freeze, Wheeler. That's more than I can say for your common sense.
I'll report you. The Board of Health will hear of this filthy arrangement.
From the loft, Anna had heard every word. The shame had a name now. Wheeler. David Wheeler's report reached the town council. Within 3 days, a special meeting was called to address the Keller nuisance.
This man has turned a barn into a hovel. He and his daughters sleep above cattle like savages.
I'd rather be called a savage than bury my child. The cattle give heat when wood runs out.
The councilmen conferred in low tones, then announced they would review the matter further. No ruling was given.
Every face in the crowd stared at her as if she had grown hooves and a tail.
The meeting dispersed into the freezing night. Robert and Anna walked home alone, the cold biting at their faces. As Robert pushed open the barn door, a rush of warm, animal-scented air enveloped them.
The smell still made her stomach turn, but the cold outside was a crueler enemy.
They climbed the ladder without a word. The loft was a sanctuary now, not a pen. That night, the town's indignation was silenced by the deep, steady breathing of the cattle below. A hard frost seized the valley overnight. At the schoolhouse, the old stove could barely keep the ice off the panes.
The cold didn't bite her anymore. The barn had taught her body to hold heat like a stove. She watched the other children stamp their feet and knew she had something they lacked.
Walking home, she passed David Wheeler's drafty barn and saw his prized mare shivering in the stall.
Maybe living above the cows isn't so shameful, Pa. Their bodies give more than the town's respect.
Respect doesn't warm your hands, Anna. I am glad you see it now.
Outside, David Wheeler observed his suffering animals with growing bitterness.
It's not right that the Keller's beasts live better than my mare. I won't let them get away with it.
That night, the frost deepened. But in the Keller barn, snow melted on the cows' backs from simple body heat. David, seeing his mare tremble in the drafts, made a silent vow. The Keller problem would be ended by any means. David Wheeler's quill scratched across paper as he wrote to the county seat. The charge, habitation unfit for human dwelling. A week later, a crisp notice appeared on the town board. A county health inspector was coming. The inspector arrived, a thin man with a ledger, and walked the barn with David Wheeler and Robert Keller.
The cattle are below, the beds above. The heat rises. There's no waste on this farm.
The inspector closed his ledger. He found no immediate violation, but the matter could be revisited by the board. That afternoon, Anna was cleaning the loft rafters when her fingers brushed against a forgotten leather-bound book.
The title was worn, but the pages spoke of alpine herders who wintered above their cattle.
She read aloud softly. They build their winter quarters above the breath of their cattle. Anna closed the book slowly and slid it beneath her mattress. Not a word to her father yet. Outside, David Wheeler watched the inspector's wagon depart, his mouth a hard line. The fight was far from over. Weeks passed. The valley's winter bit harder, and David Wheeler's firewood debt grew faster than his pride. He emptied his purse on the table. A few coins for another cord. But his barn would never hold heat. Inside his barn, the wind whistled through the walls. His pregnant mare lay in a chill draft, yet in the Keller barn, the cattle stood warm. Their breath layered the loft with a constant, living heat.
These old pages are stronger than any town whisper. The truth is in the ink.
A tinker came through with a warning. He had seen a storm rolling down from the north, one that buries valleys. Robert looked at his meager woodpile. He would need to reseal every seam, and pray it held. Anna read about such storms in her book. The alpine herders had survived by never leaving their cattle's side. They worked side by side, stuffing mud and straw into the old boards. The barn became a still pocket against the coming roar. David Wheeler heard the same warning from his window. He counted his empty purse and cursed the sky. The town crier's bell rang through the frozen streets. A blizzard was coming, one that would bury the valley to the eaves.
Your cow-heated hovel won't save you, Keller. My barn is proper. Built by men, not beasts.
Robert did not answer. He turned back into the barn and pressed more mud into the cracks. The walls had to hold.
The alpine herders had survived storms like this for centuries by staying above their cattle. If they could, so could she.
Anna closed the book and joined her father, stuffing every seam with stubborn determination. By evening, the barn was a sealed pocket. Not a draft could pass through the packed walls. Outside, the first flakes fell heavy and wet. The sky turned the color of old iron. David Wheeler looked out his window and smirked. His barn had fresh wood in the stove. He thought he was ready. As night fell, the wind began to build. The cattle in the Keller barn stirred, but the loft above was still. Then the blizzard struck. The first gust shook the barn like a thunderclap, but the seams held. The storm had begun. Outside, the blizzard screamed like a wounded beast, but inside the barn, the air was utterly still. The packed seams held.
Pa, I need to show you something. Something I should have shown you weeks ago.
She placed the worn volume in his hands. He turned to the page she had marked, his face unreadable.
The alpine herders in the old country lived above their cattle for centuries. Our barn isn't shameful. It's the oldest wisdom there is.
They build their winter quarters above the breath of their cattle. It's right here, in centuries-old ink.
His eyes glistened in the lantern light. He had been branded a fool by the whole town, but the truth was here in his daughter's discovery.
You found this all on your own, Anna. You are smarter than every man who sat in that town hall.
They sat close as the storm hammered the roof. The cattle lowed below, a steady rhythm against the shrieking wind.
We're going to make it through this, Pa. The book says families survived worse storms this way.
And as the wind searched for gaps it could not find, the Keller barn became a pocket of still warmth, untouched by the rage outside. Across the valley, David Wheeler's barn was a sieve. The storm clawed through every gap in the planking.
Hold, you worthless boards. I stuffed those cracks myself.
But the wind was a living thing. It found the gaps he had missed, the seams he had left unsealed. In her stall, the pregnant mare trembled. Frost was forming on her copper coat.
The firewood won't last the night. I've put my faith in a stove, and it's failing me.
He threw another log into the stove, but the heat vanished before it could touch the dead air.
It's the wind, not the cold. The moving air is stealing everything. Keller knew this all along. He sealed his barn like a ship's hull, and I mocked him.
The mare let out a weak whinny. Her legs were trembling, her coat stiff with ice. David pressed his forehead against the animal's flank, and for the first time, he had no words. Only the sound of the storm and his own failure. In the Keller barn, the loft was a pocket of quiet. They slept without a shiver.
The animal's breath was a heartbeat around them, keeping the cold at bay.
Hours bled into the night. Then, slowly, the wind's scream dulled to a moan, and then to silence. At the Wheeler house, David had not slept. He watched the ice crawl across the windowpane.
The thermometer by his desk read 10 below. He had no more wood to burn.
He tried to reach the barn, but the snow had drifted higher than the doors. All he could do was wait. When the wind finally died, he forced his way through chest-deep drifts, his heart hammering with dread. In the stall, his mare lay still. Frost covered her flanks, and her breath was a shallow, broken whisper.
No, you can't leave me. Not after everything. You are all that's left.
Across the valley, the Keller barn's chimney smoked into the pale dawn. The storm was over, but David's trial was just beginning. David looked at his mare, then toward the thin line of smoke rising from Keller's barn. There was only one place left to go.
Pride nearly choked him, but the mare's breath was fainter than his shame.
He wrapped her in his last blanket, then pushed into the white waste toward the Weller barn. He fell once, then again. The snow swallowed his legs, but he crawled until he reached the door.
He rehearsed the words he had never thought he'd say. I need you, Keller.
He stood before the patched door, his hand raised. The wood was warm despite the frost. His pride had cost him everything. Now, only mercy could save the last thing he loved.
Keller, Robert, open the door, please.
The sound of his own begging hung in the still air. He had never been so small. Then the latch began to lift. The man he had called a savage was coming to the door. Robert pulled the door wide. David stood there, frost in his beard, his mare's limp form behind him.
The mare, she's dying. I can't save her alone. I was wrong, Keller. I was wrong, Keller. I was wrong about everything.
Robert looked past the man, toward the loft. Anna's face appeared in the open hatch. She did not speak. She only looked at her father, and then at the mare, and gave a single, slow nod.
Get her inside. We'll make room.
Together, they dragged the shivering mare through the door. The cattle moaned lowly, shifting in their warm stalls. The mare collapsed onto the warm straw. Her frost-rimmed coat began to steam as the herd's heat enveloped her.
He had never been so grateful for the smell of manure. It smelled like his mare's last chance.
Robert watched the man who had tried to ruin him, now cradling the head of a horse in a stranger's barn. The storm had passed, but the real test was just beginning. No one in the valley would forget this winter.
I owe you everything. Keller, I had no right to ask, but you saved her. I'll never forget this.
You would have let us freeze first, Wheeler. You called my daughter a barn animal in front of the whole town.
David had no answer. The truth of those words was colder than the blizzard had been. Anna climbed down the ladder, the old leather-bound book clutched against her chest.
What's that you've got there, girl?
She opened the worn volume to the marked page, her voice steady as she read the ancient words.
In the high pastures, families sleep above their herds and never feel the winter wind.
That's from a book? You are saying this whole idea came from a book?
It wasn't madness, Mr. Wheeler. It was wisdom older than this whole valley.
For a long moment, David Wheeler could only stare at the girl who had outsmarted them all. David opened his mouth, but no sound came. The book had done what the blizzard could not. It had silenced him.
I found it in the rafters. The herders in the old country have done this for centuries. It's not new.
I didn't think of it. She brought the idea to me, and I knew it was right.
The weight of his own words at the town meeting pressed down on him. He had raged against wisdom.
I called a child a savage. I called you a savage, and you were the only ones with sense.
You called her worse, but the book sets it right. That's all that matters now.
David's hands rose to cover his face. He was no longer the accuser. He was the accused.
We don't need your apology, Mr. Wheeler. Just your understanding.
She closed the old volume, the ancient words still hanging in the warm, still air. In that moment, the shameful barn was no longer a scandal. It was a testament. The valley awoke to a world erased. The town dug tunnels between buried homes, finding dead livestock in every other barn. Word spread in hushed disbelief. The Weller barn was the only one where every animal still breathed. The councilman pushed through the drifts to find Robert. He stood before him, his voice hoarse with regret. He said, "We were wrong, Keller. The whole town was wrong. Your barn has become the valley's sanctuary." Neighbors came with what little they had. Dried meat, a sack of flour, and laid them at the barn door. David Wheeler stood apart, saying nothing. The man who had demanded their removal now had no ground to stand on.
They finally see what this barn really is. A home. A proof.
They see survival. That's enough. They don't need to understand the book.
But the book would speak for itself. Anna had already begun to think of how to share its truth. As the sun set over the buried valley, the Keller barn glowed with more than lantern light. It was the proof that survival could be simple, if you knew where to look. The next morning, David Wheeler came alone to the barn door, his steps heavy with a shame he could no longer hide.
I came back to say what I couldn't in front of the crowd. I need to speak to both of you.
Then say it, Wheeler. The floor is yours.
To you, Robert, I was wrong to try to drive you out. But to you, Anna, I owe an apology most of all.
You called us animals, but we're still here. So is your mare.
I know. And I can't repay you, but I need you to know I'll never speak against you again.
Robert studied the man who had tried to ruin him. The silence was heavy.
Forgiveness comes slow, Wheeler. But you can start by helping us shovel out the lane.
David nodded, his throat too tight for more words. He picked up the shovel. The work would be his penance. Outside, the valley was still buried in white, but inside the Keller barn, a grudging peace had begun to thaw.
Pa, the book can't stay hidden forever. The town needs to know why our barn saved us.
They might not listen. They've been wrong before.
Then let them be wrong again. I'd rather be heard than stay silent forever.
Robert studied his daughter. She had found the book, convinced him of its truth, and now wanted to convince the whole valley.
Then we'll do it together. I'll stand beside you.
The town meeting hall felt different this time. The usual stern faces now held a sliver of doubt. Anna walked to the front, the old leather volume clutched like a shield. Every eye followed her. She placed the book on the council table and opened it to the marked page. The ancient words waited.
Before you speak, girl, I want the record to show I've seen the proof. The Keller barn stands because of this book.
Then, I don't need to convince you, Mr. Wheeler. Only the rest, they build their winter quarters above the breath of their cattle. That's the line that saved our valley.
The ancient words hung in the cold air like a verdict none could dispute.
I've seen the proof in the barn. The Kellers are not savages. They followed a tradition older than this town.
One of the stern councilmen finally leaned forward. His voice, when it came, was no longer accusatory. He said, "The complaint is withdrawn, and this record will stand to clear the Keller name."
We don't ask for praise, only that nobody calls us animals again.
The breath of our cattle kept us alive. That's all that ever mattered.
A murmur ran through the crowded benches. Not scorn now, but a grudging admiration. When the Kellers walked home, the sunset painted the barn in gold. It was no longer a scandal. It was the light the valley had missed. The winter had tried to bury them all, but the breath of beasts had proven stronger than the wind. The thaw came slowly, but the town's heart had already turned. The Keller barn was no longer a scandal. It was the spine of the valley.
Every evening, people came asking to see the book. They wanted to copy the passage in their own hand.
An older farmer said, "If you'd told me a year ago, I'd be studying a child's book for barn wisdom. I'd have called you a fool. The Wheeler mare grew strong again, and when spring came, she foaled in the very stall where she had nearly frozen.
I was wrong to call this barn a hovel, Robert. It gave back what I nearly threw away.
This barn never cared about your opinion, Wheeler. But I am glad you learned before you had to bury her.
The book isn't just about cattle, Mr. Wheeler. It's about listening to what the old world already knew.
That winter, the valley had learned a hard lesson. Survival wasn't about wealth or propriety. It was about respecting the breath that rose in the dark. The old leather-bound volume stayed in the loft, its pages worn thin by the hands of 100 neighbors. And above the sleeping cattle, the Keller loft remained a pocket of peace, where the simplest wisdom had saved them all. The town council formally adopted the herder's method. Every new barn would be built with a warm loft above the stalls.
I'll leave a copy of the book at the town library. No child should grow up without knowing where real warmth comes from.
The old leather-bound volume was placed in a glass case at the schoolhouse, a reminder of what had saved them.
The Keller name is no longer a stain. It's a lesson. I'll make sure my grandchildren know it.
I never wanted a legacy, Wheeler. I just wanted my daughter to wake up warm.
Families traveled from distant settlements to see the barn where beasts and men had shared breath and survived.
A forgotten book, a father's will, and the breath of cattle. That's all it took to rewrite a winter.
Above the barn door, someone carved the old phrase, "They build their winter quarters above the breath of their cattle." The blizzard had buried the town to the eaves, but it could not bury the simple truth that rose from a child's book. The Keller barn glowed through the long winter evenings, a golden promise that the coldest nights could still be lived through. Inside the loft, Robert and Anna sat in the familiar dark, the cattle breathing below like a slow tide.
After everything, the smell was no longer a curse. It was the scent of safety.
We'll never have to fear winter again. We know the secret now.
It was never a secret, Pa. It was just forgotten.
She placed the worn book back on its shelf, its work done. The words had been heard. Outside, the valley had begun to heal, but the story was already spreading beyond the mountains. Every evening, as the sun set, the Keller barn glowed with the simple truth that had been there all along. The blizzard had tried to bury them, but the breath of beasts had spoken louder than any storm.
We moved above the livestock for body heat, and in return, they gave us a future.
The barn stood against the white world, a hearth where beasts and family drew the same warm air. In the quiet after the thaw, the Kellers sat in their loft and listened to the cattle below.
The world had called them animals, but the animals had proven to be the world's most honest teachers.
We'll never build another barn without a loft for the beasts. The lesson is carved in wood now.
Visitors to the valley spoke of the golden barn, where breath and family were one. The story grew beyond its walls. But for Robert and Anna, it was never about legend. It was about the floor that stayed warm on the coldest nights.
A forgotten book, and a herd of cattle had rewritten the winter. That was the only miracle she ever needed.
Below, the cattle stirred in their sleep, their breath rising in slow, steady clouds through the hatch. Above the barn door, the carved phrase caught the last light of dusk. They build their winter quarters above the breath of their cattle. The blizzard had buried the town, but the truth had risen with the steam of simple beasts. It would never be forgotten again. The Keller barn stood, a warm promise in the frozen wilderness, its lesson etched in wood and breath.